is the one right, though, that has a but. The but is that you cannot keep people out if you're doing so in order to maintain a high standard of living. And this comes out of the church's teaching regarding stewardship. So all of the resources that we have, our financial resources, our material resources, our own gifts and talents that we can contribute to the community, we are to have a disposition of that of a caretaker. So possession, ownership, is really a problem in the Judeo-Christian tradition. We're to see ourselves as being a caretaker, and everything we have, we should understand as having some social destination. God has given us dominion over something that we are then the caretaker over for our community. So sovereign nations have the right to regulate their borders, but not to deny people entry in order to maintain a high standard of living, because that would go against the concept of stewardship. The fourth is that undocumented people should be treated humanely and with dignity. So the second right is that they can migrate. If they migrate, the focus is to be on their own dignity. And then last, people who are seeking asylum or refugee status are also to be treated with dignity. They are to be given refuge from that which they're fleeing. They are not to be detained, and they are to have their claim heard by a credible and competent authority, which is typically not the case in the United States and a lot of the practices that the Border Control has set up. With all of these rights, Pope John Paul II, after doing having a synod of all the bishops in the Americas, came up with 3 calls, particularly that the U.S. Catholic bishops and the Mexican bishops have asked to be focused on in terms of migration. And it's particularly appropriate for the Lenten time period. And those 3 are communion, conversion, and solidarity. So in terms of communion, if you're offering hospitality to someone, you have the opportunity to create a relationship with them. And when we talk about human dignity, I think in the United States context, it can be really difficult to get a sense of what human dignity really means, because we live in such an individualistic society that's focused so much on property rights, on negative rights, that I have the right to what's mine and you have no right to what's mine. Whereas in the Christian tradition, the teaching on human dignity comes out of our understanding of the human person being created in the image of God. And that God in whose image we're created is understood to be a Trinitarian God. Now, it's very difficult to say much about the Trinity. It's a mystery of the faith. But when people do articulate something about the Trinity and God, the focus is always on the relationality of the Trinity. That it's this relationship of love between the 3 entities. So in terms of our own human dignity, we're only human if we are persons in relationship. And that relationship is not to be understood as stopping at the border. So one's birthplace or one's immigration status is not to dictate that relationship. So in terms of communion, if you provide hospitality to people, you'll learn their story. You'll see their face. You'll see what they've gone through. And in the midst of this relationship, the receiver will have a conversion experience. So when we talk about immigration a lot in the U.S., it's this utilitarian calculus, right? What do we get out of immigrants? And if we get enough out of them, then it's okay for some of them to be here. Whereas in Catholic social teaching, there's this sense that we all grow through the suffering, oftentimes, of what the migrant is experiencing. So there's a call for us to have our hearts and minds converted as a result of this experience of offering hospitality to people. And hospitality is not meant to be this experience where you sort of give out of your excess and you don't then have a relationship. And oftentimes, Abraham and Sarah offering a generous feast to the 3 visitors representing the Lord is put out there as what hospitality really is in terms of the stranger. So communion, conversion, and then solidarity. The more you have a relationship with someone and understand their story, the more your mind and heart are converted, the more that you will then be committed to working for the change that will enable them and you to realize your human dignity in a more holistic way. So conversion, communion, and solidarity. Then the last piece, which doesn't get a lot of play, I think, in Catholic teaching, is that whenever we talk about rights, which we do quite a bit in the United States, the bishops always challenge us to think about what the corresponding duties are. For every right, there's always a corresponding duty. And oftentimes there are more than one corresponding duty. So for instance, if somebody has a right to find opportunity in their homeland, if we're looking at public policy discussions here in the United States, we have to look at what are the reasons for migration to the United States. I mean, yes, people migrate because we have labor markets here that are unfilled at the unskilled and the highly skilled levels. But we have a lot of foreign policy, economic policy, free trade agreements, subsidies to U.S. corporations that result in markets shifting such that lower income entrepreneurs in other countries end up having to move to the United States. So the question isn't how many people do we let in, but it's this complex web in the midst of globalization for what rights and duties are called for from us as people in a receiving country. What policies do we have to push for in addition to people being treated justly once they're here, people being able to adjust their status within a reasonable period of time and not waiting 19 years. So that's why immigration really is a very difficult topic to cover, because there are so many ways in which you can enter: family, employment-based, refugee, or asylee. And each of those categories, with regard to the globalized world that we're living in right now, has multifaceted situations that impact that. But generally speaking, here in the U.S., we create policies that we benefit from, primarily. But many of those policies that we benefit from end up resulting in push factors, which are then why people end up coming here. So the duties piece is not talked about very often, but the Catholic social teaching really does challenge people to say, anytime you want to talk about a right, think about what the duty is against you that needs to be satisfied in terms of that right. You may have a right, but you also have a duty. So I think that's sort of a general summary of Catholic social teaching, and I'll stop there and hand it over to Elena.
It is a privilege to be here, and what a great opportunity to talk to you. I just feel at home in this place. There is a spirit here. Thank you so much. I really feel very welcome. Thank you for the Siena Center and all the ones who organized this wonderful panel. I'm not that great with technology, so Mark has this powerful multimedia. I wish I could learn. I'm learning these little things, moving things. I have to ask one of my interns to teach me how to do that. So my power presentation is very steady, kind of just the traditional one. But I hope this will communicate our ministry with immigrants in the Archdiocese of Chicago. I want to give a very brief overview of the Archdiocese. The Archdiocese is formed for Cook County and Lake County, and it's the largest diocese in the state. We have 6 dioceses in this state. We have 6 million people in the Archdiocese of Chicago, and around 40% of them are Catholics. And if you ask me how many Catholics go to church, that's a different story. Very interesting. Only 25%, but 40% of people say they are Catholics. 41% of these total Catholics are Hispanics.